大家好，我们是 The Wanderers， 我是易然，现在是一名个人投资者，也在探索 AI 和投资与知识工作的结合。
我是 Jason， 我做过 VC 和家族办公室，现在在做自己的数字货币股票基金 NDB。
我是 Vincent， 是一个互联网和投资的老兵，现在在做一个 fundamental 加 macro 的对冲基金。
每期我们会基于市场一线的视角，探讨时下最值得关心和思考的热点话题。Attention is all we need。欢迎你和我们一起漫游。
大家好，欢迎来到 The Wanderers。我们这期邀请到了一个非常有意思的神秘嘉宾 Tomas。Tomas 是一个在中国创业的阿根廷人，他自己做的天猫淘宝店是细分品类的第1名。然后他是我们其实Wanderers 这个播客在几周以前就已经聊到过阿根廷这个国家，而且我们觉得可能在今天这个逆全球化的世界，可能阿根廷是扮演着一个非常独特的角色，因为最新的这个总统米莱非常非常的特别，他是一个非常拥抱自由主义经济学的人，然后很多人在互联网上面把米莱当成是一个阿根廷的 Trump 或者一个南美的 Trump， 但是我们是觉得他其实是很独特的，基于各种各样的原因吧，很多的媒体会妖魔化这个人。所以我们一直想找到一个机会，有一个本地的阿根廷人能够跟我们讲关于他怎么看米莱的和米莱到底是怎么样的。我们很幸运这期邀请到了 Tomas， 然后让他来给我们讲一讲他眼中的米莱是什么，是怎样的。Tomas, we are happy to have you here today. And this is by far our most exciting topic in our podcast. And this is our first English podcast ever.We've been interested in Argentina's revolution for a very long time, for the past 6 months. And we're happy to have you. So Tomas, maybe can you start by briefly introducing yourself and why you are doing your entrepreneurship in China, and what is your basic view about Malay? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, Ran, Vincent, for the invitation. It truly is an honor to be here in your podcast, and especially to talk about a topic that I have a lot of passion for, which is Argentina. And not only Argentina, but also Argentina's economic and political scene. It's something that I follow every day, and despite it's not my daily job nowadays, as it used to be before, but I just keep up to it every day because it's something I'm really passionate about. So, yeah, my name is Tomas Fuentes Benitez, 中文名是方天木, and I was born in Argentina. I'm 34 years old now. I came originally, I'm a lawyer, a business lawyer. I graduated law school in Argentina and NYU in the US. And then I worked as a lawyer in one of Argentina's biggest law firm and in my family law firm as well. But I knew I wanted to start a business and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I also knew I really liked China. I felt really intrigued by China, history, culture, language, and how it had developed over the years after 改革开放. And so I just wanted to be part of it and try to help bridge China and the West. And so over the years in Argentina, I was already studying about China. And then in 2016, I was lucky to get the Schwarzman Scholarship, 苏世民奖学金, to come to Tsinghua to do a master's. And so that was like a dream come true. I came here and then I realized China is much more complex than I imagined, even though I had already read a lot about China. And I realized you cannot play by ear in China. You actually got to go deep and try to understand as much as possible. And how the language was also important. So I decided to stay. I was appointed Argentina's embassy to China's business advisor by the former ambassador back then. And so I was helping Argentinian companies enter the Chinese market and Chinese companies go to Argentina and Latin America. That was really interesting. But then I knew I wanted to start my own company. So since I was always interested in healthy food and sports and healthy living, I created a healthy food brand direct to consumer that is called Perfect Bowl. And we do healthy meals and snacks and sell across China online. And we've also entered retail channels, which has been a crazy ride as well. But yeah,
you should be the number one brand on Taobao, right? In this category.
Yeah, for that category is like 轻食与吃菜. in Tmall.我们是拼类第一名。Yeah. Still a small company.
And I saw your 小红书. Yeah, it was very cool. And we will definitely post your link below this podcast.
For sure.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that's been also very fun to do content for Chinese social media. And with the startup, it's been a crazy ride also because we've raised capital from investors and also like publicly traded Chinese company as well. And so it's been a very interesting learning process. And but anyway, going back to our topic, because I was also part of in Argentina, I was part of one political party before, helping them, campaign, etc. So really happy to talk about this. And as we were talking off the air with you guys, you were describing Milei as 很独特, and I think that's the overarching word to describe him, because he's not only, first of all, once you take a look at him for the first time, you're like, okay, what is going on here? He has long hair, which is not really good. It's all over the place. He likes to wear a lot of leather jackets. Now that he's president, a little bit less, but even so, his speeches are very energetic. And he used to, before he was president, he would be getting to really heated discussions and sometimes even a little bit over the top with political opponents or journalists, etc. Because he's always been very passionate about what he believes. That's why in Argentina at the beginning, the people who really started to support him were the young people. Mm-hmm. And the older people, who tend to be more conservative, considered him too flamboyant, like too aggressive or too.
So the reason why that we really want you to be a part of this was because that we feel most of the medias, like you said, they tend to make short-term metaphors on all these political leaders' images. And sometimes they just shortcut by saying part of what the leaders actually said, but without really digging into his political ideas. And it's great that you have been working for the Argentina embassy. So I guess that you could be the best person that we can talk to, like in China right now. And this is the reason that why we are really, really interested in this topic. So to begin with, maybe can you tell us a bit about the Argentina history? We know that Argentina used to be the richest country in the world in terms of GDP per capita. At one point, Times Magazine thinks that the next decade, in early 1900s, they think that Argentina could be one of the richest country in the world. But what happened during the process, and what caused Argentina to become the Argentina that we see today? And maybe we should start with that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the praise. I don't know if I can be the best one to, but at least I try to keep very well informed about this. And what I'll try to do is to describe him as objectively as I can, leaving aside my personal views most of the time. I just want to give you guys as a very accurate depiction of what he really is. This doesn't mean that his policies or whatever he's trying to do would work everywhere or in every country. It's just Argentina is a very particular country, and I think our situation is what gave way to his presidency. So it's quite interesting to talk about. As you said, Argentina in 1895 actually was number one in the ranking of per capita GDP in the world. And that was impressive because happened only in 40 years. Mm-hmm. In 1960, even less than 40 years. In 1960, we enacted a new constitution after being independent from the Spanish, because we used to be a Spaniard colony. And we instituted economic freedom to a great extent, property rights protection to a really high extent, and also gave immigrants equal rights to everything in Argentina. Whoever, even in our constitution to the day, says whoever steps a foot on Argentinian soil will have the same rights as the citizens. So that allowed Argentina to develop through private enterprise and private investment extremely rapidly, and got us to that point. In turn, meant that huge waves of European immigrants, actually immigrants from around the world, but back then Europe was going through a really harsh economic times. It was the prelude of the First World War, and so we actually received, just like the US, a huge amount of European immigrants that came looking for a better future.
You guys were just like the counterpart of United States on the other end of the continent, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because it's literally, they are in the north of America, we're
the other
in
end.
The most southern part.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so the ship leaving from Europe either go north or go south. And back then, they would normally, what would happen is Saxons, let's say people more from UK or Germany or the north of Europe, in more majority would go to the US, and more Italy, Spanish, other more Latin countries in Europe would come to Argentina. But of course, we received from a lot of them. Even if you look at Argentina national team for football that we just got, you became champions again.
Yeah.
You look at the last name, you will see. Thank you. I just had to say it. You would see it like one is called McAllister, another one is Lo Celso, which is Italian. You got all over the place.
Right.
To the point, blows my mind when I was reading this in history books in college that in 1905, if you go out on the streets of Buenos Aires, 3 out of 4 people didn't speak Spanish, which is our native tongue.
Yeah.
And so, that was, and my family, a lot of people's family were like that. And
I'm curious, like what kind of other language do they speak? Portuguese or I don't know, Italian?
Yeah, Italian. There's the biggest, because we even to this day we have a lot of us who have double citizenship. Like I have Spanish, and a lot of them have Italian as well. And even to this day, for example, Argentina has the second largest Jewish community in the world, second to the US.
Oh, is that
and
right?
We also have the biggest, largest Muslim community of Latin America, and they coexist in peace. So Argentina has always been a very welcoming country for immigration. We were the first country in Latin America, in the Americas, to abolish slavery, before the U.S., before Brazil. So it was very liberal in the European way of
very advanced.
Very advanced. So basically, the issues began for us around 1930s, when the governments at that time started to going away from the model that had made Argentina rich, and started. Of course, it was a difficult time back then because there was the first, and then the Second World War, Great Depression. There was a lot of stuff going on, but our country decided that they needed to control the economy more, pass on more regulation. They needed to increase government weight on the economy and increase its spending. We got away from the gold standard and created the Argentinian Central Bank, which is something I mentioned because has been the root of all inflation problems in Argentina, and is something Milei is always talking about.
He wanted to bomb the central bank, right?
Yes, he wants to destroy it. Milei is a very unique figure because he believes in his ideals so much that he's actually even done a play on theater about Austrian economics, and
Austrian economics.
Comedy. Yeah, and so it was in Argentina, Broadway Street. He actually was performing this play where he would bomb the central bank. This was way before he went into politics, So
this is before the election. It's something that he's
this is way before,
in.
yeah. Like what's special, like many things are special. One about him, one thing is that he's devoted his life to the study of economics. First, when whatever he's done in his life, he's done it very an all in. First, he was a football player.
What exactly happened during the 1930s that made Argentina's development slow down?
Yeah, so our governments back then, they decided they wanted to turn their back on the model that had made Argentina successful, and they thought it was time, since Argentina was a rich country then, that it was time for them to use that riches and take advantage, And so they raised tax levels. They started regulating the economy more. They increased the size of the government to a great extent. They turned away from the gold standard, and they created Argentina Central Bank and started printing currency without gold backup. And so slowly but surely, they went deeper and deeper down this path. And so the parties and the governments in power had changed over the years in Argentina, but this policy or this big trajectory remain unchanged. So it wasn't a problem, because some people in Argentina mentioned a problem of being Perón was the problem, but I don't really think so, or a lot of people don't think so, because many parties had the chance to do it and they continued with the same policies.
I was actually going through the stupid Chinese online video that they kind of describe the reason why after Perón, so many presidents has continued the closing of the opening up of Argentina trade is because that the landlords in Argentina don't really it's not in line with industrialization, because they need the human capital to do all this agriculture stuff. Do you agree with that, or is it just something that they are bullshitting about?
I totally disagree, because already before, when Argentina was booming, as we were talking about, Argentina had already become the most industrialized country in Latin America, like only second to the US. And so we were already industrializing. And then the second argument is the labor supply. And reality is the agriculture is not labor intensive. And also, even if it were labor intensive, we had received so much immigration that like labor was not a problem at all. And because we were increasing our productivity, then salaries were also raising rapidly. And so people were getting richer. So that's why immigrants like my great-grandparents could come to Argentina with nothing. They have maybe $2 in their pocket, but they were able, through hard work, to quickly, just like the American dream in the US back then, they were able to do similar just by working. And so it was just an unfortunate turn of events of, I think the leadership back then decided to change. And I mean, they didn't invent that trajectory. That was something Europe was doing. Like if they had stayed course, it would have been an anomaly. They just follow the current of Europe, which was becoming more protectionist. It was, curtailing international trade, and there was war. They were also abusing printing of currency to finance the wars. That's why Germany also had hyperinflation in those years. The issue is that we did all that without having the war. Right. So, yeah. And so,
we've been just talking about this. Many countries has going down, like the similar path, right? But what prevent Argentina from reverting back to one of those success or golden models?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, something that Milei always cites is Hayek's Road to Serfdom, where he argues that once you start intervening in the economy more and more, then it's an unstable it's an unstable situation where it will ask you for more intervention. Like if you start manipulating the currency, then you need to manipulate, like you're going to start losing reserves in the central bank, let's say. And so to stop that, you're going to stop people from buying dollars. That's what happened in Argentina. And so instead of going back to the model, it's easier for them to just keep putting more restrictions. And then once you realize, then your economy is completely jacked up by regulation. So Argentina became from basically the freest country in the world economically to now, if you look at the Economic Freedom Index, we are ranked at
40 something.
Yeah, 140.
I checked. I did my homework.
Yeah, nice. Which is insane. We're labeled as a repressed country. And so that's what happened.
Right.
Here's one more interesting question. What is usually the profile of an Argentina leader? I guess that's they are not that well educated in a way, could be, right? In the past. I mean, this really feels like some other countries that we know quite familiar with. Yeah. That they kind of impose all these policies based on their, how do you say it? In Chinese, it's like 拍脑袋.
They haven't been uneducated in the way that they're not formally educated, right? Most of them have been lawyers and they've been university graduates, but they're just been...
But not economists.
Yeah, Milei is the first economist to ever be president. Yeah, but most importantly, what happened is the system got corrupted over the years to the point where the political leadership was more catering to their own interest more than let's say, the people's interest.
They're mostly like the wealth family, like Macri is one of the most wealthy people in Argentina.
He is exactly what you described, but the previous leaderships have not been from the economical, like, business elites, let's say. Mostly they've been people who have made a political career from zero, and then they've gotten rich through politics. So that's why if you look at polls in Argentina, like, they rank how much the positive, the reputation of a 普通的职业, right? Politicians rank last, because Argentinians not only have felt that because of bad policy we've become more poor, but also they have become richer. So it's like a double bad. And so that's, in a way, why Milei was able to be elected, because he's an outsider of politics. He was an economist. He is an economist that was a lecturer. He's published more than 50 economic papers on economics. He's a mathematician that, he likes econometrics. So he's very knowledgeable in that. And then later he became the chief economist for one of Argentina's biggest corporations, like helping them analyze business, investment plans and that kind of stuff. So he knows the theory, but he also look at the application. But most importantly, his campaign and everything was only an outsider can come and disrupt this political status quo where people who get in just do it for their own benefit. It's the opposite of being a public servant, where you do it to serve the people. Well, in our country, at least for the last 50, 60 years, majority were doing to enrich themselves. So that's why he's done. And what touched the people is that he really believes in it, and every action that he has taken aligns with his speech. Give you an example. And his views are seen by many people as extreme. For example, as being a libertarian.
Before getting into Milei, let's talk a bit about like the hyperinflation that Argentina has in the past, and maybe we can combine it a bit with how the government has always been a deficit in terms of their budget.
Yeah, because that's a very interesting, like, what we are curious about, right? We haven't been living in a country with 100% inflation rate. We can't even imagine what it would be like to live in that kind of situation. It must be a very foreign concept for Chinese audience.
It's insane. It's
of like all the countries in the world, I guess only China and US haven't been this generation. They haven't experienced any hyperinflation or fail of their local currencies.
Basically,
other countries around the world, they all face something similar at one point in the past 30 years. So this is like this is maybe a common phenomenon for you, but a very new phenomenon for like all the Chinese audience that we're gonna.
And that's a really good thing, because inflation is a very pernicious phenomenon. It's really bad for the economy and extremely bad for people, especially for poor people. So basically what happened to Argentina has had a chronic inflation problem for the last 80 years. And it started when I was mentioning when we depegged our currency from gold. And many countries did that. But the issue is that we started printing large quantities of currency to support the government deficit. And that's the key problem, the government deficit. Because the government up until after 1940s increasingly were running fiscal deficits. I was mentioning that out of the last 122 years, 112 years, we had deficit. And so deficit, you either cover it with debt or you cover it with inflation, with printing of currency. And we have abused both. That's why Argentina has become the biggest defaulter of foreign debt in IMF history, and also one of the most inflationary countries. So printing of currency or deficit has been a drug for our government.
I like that phrase.
Yeah, we've been addicted to it for 112 years. And no matter what party was governing, so this wasn't a problem of one party on one leadership, it was across the board. And even in the 90s, when the government back then tried to go through a more free market economy, they didn't solve the deficit, and that's what destroyed that system. But before going into that, we've had many cycles. Well, in those years that I mentioned up until now, we've destroyed 13 zeros to the currency. Basically, what that means is over the years, let's say we start with, for example, in 2000, 1 peso could buy you $1. It was 1-to-1 on the exchange rate. But now, 24 years later, you need 1,500 pesos to buy $1.
Crazy.
This is crazy.
It's insane.
And dollars has been depreciating as well.
Exactly. And that is even with that extremely depreciated dollar. So really hard to grasp.
But what is it like for normal people, for the citizens to live in an environment like that? You grew up in Argentina. Now, what was it been like?
Yeah. So, and I was able to live both systems because in the 90s, we had 0% inflation for 10 years. That was the only 10 years that we solved inflation. And back then, the government, knowing that we had a tendency to overspend, that government said, you know what? I'm only going to print 1 peso when our central bank receives $1 from export. So that way it's instead of pegging the peso to the gold, we peg it to the US dollar. So those 10 years we had 0% inflation, and the peso was chosen the strongest currency in 1992 in the world. But because we still run deficits on spending, our debt increased, and then we couldn't pay the debt in 2001. And so we defaulted and we started printing currency again. And that's what happened between 2001 and now, and last year that I mentioned that we went from 1-to-1 to 1,500. Right. And so for an everyday person, it's very stressful. We've gotten used to it, but it's very stressful because you get paid in pesos, but you're having monthly inflation. For example, last year in December, we had 20% inflation in 1 month. So you get paid, and what people do, you immediately change to US dollars.
Right.
But then the government started restricting the purchase of currency, right? Of foreign currency. So you had to go to the black market or to people who were willing to sell it to you.
So is it really very normal for ordinary people to go to the black market to exchange for the US dollar?
Extremely normal, and it's not like black market just means that it's unofficial, right? But there are many people who are selling it. It just cannot be advertised, but it's very common phenomenon, and everybody would do it. And that's why inflation is so bad, because not only you will lose your part of your salary every month.
Right. Can we say that US dollar has become roughly the de facto currency for everyday living?
That's absolutely correct.
Because it would be very strange, right? If you received your, let's say, 100 peso for your salary this month, and you're expecting the food you're buying or the things you're buying are going to skyrocketing, right? In the next 2-3 months, what would you do? This is really hard to imagine that scenario.
So that's why inflation is really bad, especially for poor people, because poor people don't have the capacity of savings. So each month they cannot buy US dollars because they need to use it to buy food, for example. Right? So they suffer the depreciation of the currency every month. Right. Everybody suffers it, but they suffer it the most because people who have more they get paid more, or they're middle upper class, etc. They can quickly change to US dollar, and at least they can hedge inflation better. And so Argentina has been termed a bi-monetary economy, like de facto, just what you were mentioning. So for everyday life, people still have been using pesos because we have to. You have to pay taxes in pesos. The government has been always trying to make people avoid using the US dollar. They've done everything they can to, prevent people from using the US dollar. It's just that the people don't want to sacrifice themselves that much, so they will try to find ways to protect themselves. Right.
I'm curious. Does that affect the saving rate of Argentina? And also, I think maybe also it would impact the consumption habit where people don't save immediately. Whatever they get, they just spend it. Is it I mean, do you think that's something that's influenced your action as well? And also, people would not invest in a way. They would prefer just to spend it right away.
Yeah, so that's why modern monetary theory, a lot of the people of them believe that a little bit of inflation is good to a certain economy because it incentivizes consumption. But my view, and let's say Milei's view, is that if everything you got to take to the extreme to see if it makes sense, right? Like if you take it to the extreme, you look at Argentina. You're extremely incentivizing consumption because when especially poor people get their salaries, they go to the supermarket and they will stock up as much as they can on food.
Exactly.
And then people who have a little bit of surplus in their salary, they will buy US dollars to protect themselves. That's why when you in Argentina, you look at buying big assets, let's say a car, an apartment, land, all that stuff. They always have been in US dollars. The prices have been advertised in US dollars. But then everyday things are still in pesos because the law prevents the stores from using US dollars.
Hey, Thomas, I have a question. So you mentioned that in 1990s, you guys have enjoyed a long time, good times, right? But why it stopped? I think this is under the term of Menem, right? But why it stopped, even though they provided so much progress?
Yeah, so there are two reasons. One of them is that they solved the monetary problem by pegging the peso to the US dollar. So therefore, they destroyed inflation. That was really good. We had monetary stability for 10 years. That was unheard of for Argentina back then. So that was really good. And they also deregulated the economy. They opened up trade. But they have one capital problem, which was the government spending was not reduced. So since you cannot print money to finance that, they started gaining more debt. And by early 2000, they could not repay the debt. And back then, the IMF did not want to refinance. They rejected refinancing Argentina debt. And so the government had the choice of either reducing spending of the government or breaking the dollar peg currency system. And they decided to devaluate the currency.
Right.
And so that was a really bad choice because it meant that people who had all their life savings in the bank system, all of a sudden, let's say they had 100,000 pesos, they had $100,000. But the government overnight said, actually, we're breaking that, and now it's 230 pesos. $1 is you need let's say 2.5 pesos to buy $1.
Yeah.
So your life saving got half, even got reduced to less than half.
I would even go so far as to say an overnight change or steep change is probably even more horrible.
Yes.
Because people are getting used to the stable environment and you change it overnight.
And so Milei always says that back then what happened is they say that our government having a central bank has been like a monkey having a knife, right? It's nothing good can come out of that because we have a history of financing deficit with it. And so back then in the 90s, they took the knife away, but in 2001, they gave it back. And so since then happened what I mentioned, from 1-to-1 to 1 to 1,500.
Right.
And I'll just add one more thing and so the successive governments that we had after that, they argued that crisis happened because Argentina had done an opening up and reform in the 90s. That's the reason why we had that problem. And so a lot of people believed, if we open up the economy again, then we're going to have a crisis again like that. When in reality, the problem was the governments had deficit again.
Right. That part of the equation is never solved. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really bad because we wasted as a country 10 years of incredible world commodity prices, like soybeans, all the things that Argentina exports.
Yeah.
Oh, right. From 2000 to 2008 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. From 2000 to 2008, it blew up. Like a ton of soybeans went to $600. It was trading at 200 and it went to 600.
Right. That's when you see your neighbor country, Brazil, get so much development during that period.
Yeah. And Brazil was absolutely more underdeveloped than Argentina before. But they didn't waste those years as much as we did. So yeah, that's been basically the monetary problems we've had for a very long time.
Yeah, but after 1990s, so you guys just come back to Peronism again. So how would the reaction from people? How would they think about the Peronism? why they choose this kind of corrupted system
so
again.
Peronism is not that they return to Peronism, because Peronism, let's say it's a party in Argentina, and that party has been very protectionist, and also was the party that did the 90s free trade time. So they have done everything. They can do everything. They can go to the left or they can go to the right. Their ideology, they've used it to do many different things. Actually, Kirchner, both the husband and the wife that were the ones who were presidents between 2003 and recently, but this last government that ended last year, she was the vice president of that government. So she was also part of it. They were senators and they were governors of a province during the 90s, and they were supporting the opening up and reform era of Argentina in the 90s, right? So they were part of one way and then they did it the other way. They just convinced the people that what the people needed was more subsidies, more welfare, higher taxes on the rich. It's a very typical maneuver from some governments of trying to make people turn on each other, saying, oh, all our problems is because the rich are very greedy and we need to take resources from them and then give it to the poor. And so we went through a phase of really high taxes, more regulations, entrepreneurship is bad, companies are evil, capitalism is very bad. We need a huge government that raises huge taxes. And so that gave rise to more corruption, more subsidies, more welfare. And we now, for the past 20 years, we've had people who've received government money without having to work for 20 years. So that damaged the cultural fabric of the country in a way, because people have seen their parents never go to work, right, and still get money from the government.
Right. Here's a very honest and direct question. Do you think the citizens, the people, also play a part in such kind of a slippery slope, right? I like your phrase, this is a drug, right? Welfare is a drug, but if they're getting used to that, do you think this can be like turn around or revert?
I think because Argentina since 1983 has been a democracy, then of course the voters have responsibility, but I tend to put a lot of responsibility in the leadership, because that's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be the leaders and guide the country to what they think, what they should know.
Educated people,
instead of just doing something for their own benefit. And so that's what Milei's campaign was so different from the past. Because otherwise, how could you have, let's say, Cristina Kirchner, right, the former president? She has been on record in the 90s saying that Menem was the best president that Argentina had ever had. And then 10 years later, she's saying it was the worst and we need to do the opposite. How could that be possible, right? So they were just pursuing their own interest and sacrificing the country's, well-being for it.
I understand.
So and that's why Argentina, it had to take an outsider that just told Argentina the truth. The people sort of transmitted a philosophy, a way of solving our problems in an honest way.
Just feels a lot like Trump as well.
I
mean, in a way, he's also an outsider, that he's not well connected in Washington, and he has like his own way of looking at things.
Yes,
it's just another broad-based solution.
It makes so much sense now that Milei is also a professor, right? You don't only need a politician; you also need someone who can actually educate the people.
Yeah, exactly, and also because Milei, because he's an outsider, and I think this is very different from Trump, because Trump, to get elected, he went through the Republican Party. But Milei, actually, and this makes his rise to power even more impressive, he did not go through any of Argentina's big political parties. He created a new party, and he ran for Congress 2 years ago. He was elected to National Congress, and 2 years later, he was president. This is completely unprecedented. And so he's an outsider to a higher extent that Trump is, in my opinion. And about being a professor, you were mentioning about being a professor. And something else about his past make it interesting. He had a rock band. He was a rocker in high school and early years of college, So he knows how to be a showman and how to connect with the audience.
Connect to the audience. Yes.
So even in his rallies, when he was running for president and for Congress, he would do all this open air in a park or something, a rally, and people would go, and he would go through instead of going up the stairs of the how to say, what do you call the 上台? 他不会上台. He would go from behind the crowd, go through the people, like hugging them and talking to them. And
like a rock star, yeah,
like a rock star. And with a leather jacket, and he would start by singing like a song about libertarian values. And he would, like other politicians could not understand how would that be possible, because how could Milei gather 30,000 people in Argentina to talk about Austrian economics and how a central bank currency would call endemic inflation, right? That was completely unheard of.
Fascinating.
Career politicians were like, what is going on?
It definitely takes someone with charisma like that to really start the revolution.
Yeah. So the combination of him being a rock star, he was also a goalkeeper for professional football in his early college years. So he was all about football, and he himself explains that to be a goalkeeper in football, in soccer, you have to be a very special type of character, because if you're a 前锋, if you score the goal, you're a star. If you miss the shot, well, 必然的. He's not going to get all the shots in, right? But as a goalkeeper, if you save it, you're good. But if they score, they lose because of you. And so a small mistake has catastrophic consequences. So you have to be a very strong character. When your team scores, they all celebrate really far away from you. You cannot celebrate with the team. You dress different from the rest of the teammates. You can use your hands while the others cannot. So that says that it molded him to be able to be strong with his own views if he believed they're the right ones.
Thomas, I think maybe we should back to the topic. So I'm curious, can you quickly summarize what exactly is Milei trying to achieve, and what his economic policy is, and how he's gonna make it, and then what is his progress so far?
Yeah. So first, I can say what he ran a campaign with and what made him different from the rest, because I think that was very atypical in Argentine politics as well. We had always had politicians run campaigns using slogans or telling people what they thought the people wanted to hear. And then, for example, there's a very historical phrase that Menem said when he was elected. Well, in the 90s, he ran his first campaign saying he was going to take very interventionist policy. And then when he was elected, he did a more free market approach. And then when they asked him, when he was already president, he said, well, if I had told the people what I was planning to do, they wouldn't have voted for me, right? Milei completely changed that in Argentine politics. He said that what he believed to be true from the beginning. And even though it was not popular at that time to be libertarian or to be more right-wing, Argentina was very, very intervention and state-driven economy. And even in the public debate was like that. So he not only told that what he believed to be true, he even went deeper. And you mentioned Macri's government before. Macri was also trying to reform, but he was saying, we actually don't want to do it that much. He was scared to say what he believed to be true, not to be criticized. Milei was complete opposite. He said, we have to do this as a country. It's going to be hard. We need to reform. We need to cut spending. We need to stop printing money. It's going to cause us a short-term recession in the short term, but we need to do it. That's the only way Argentina can become a great nation again. And he explained why high taxes, even though they sound good, they sound fair, they're actually really bad for all different kind of people. No matter if you are high income or low income, it's going to hurt you. And he explained why property rights are really important. And you should be able to enjoy the fruits of your effort as a person, no matter how much you make. He made all these teachings over years of going to TV news stations. And he would do it in a very compelling way. He started getting more and more followers. And many people who used to think that the way should be higher taxes, more regulation, the typical Argentinian way, changed their views and started to support him. And even more so when they realized that he wasn't getting into politics to become rich. He actually wasn't. The first thing he did when he was elected to Congress, he publicly said, I've always said that taxation is theft in a way, because we are taking the money from the hardworking people. And of course, we need some form of taxation, but we need to keep it to a minimum. And since I believe this, I'm going to be giving away my salary every month, but I'm not going to give it away myself, because then I would be making charity with someone else's money. And that's what I'm against of. So what I'm going to do, he said, I'm going to put up a website, and I'm going to allow every Argentinian to sign up. And then an algorithm will randomly assign someone to get, each month will get my salary. That way I'm not doing charity myself with not my own money. So that was all. And then people started to realize, okay, this guy is not only talking about something, but he's living everything. He's doing everything according to that. And that made a huge change, because politicians in Argentina, as I mentioned, have a very bad reputation of never doing what they say that they're going to do.
Interesting. Maybe we can quickly. So I remember that you sent out a quick summary about what was Argentina like when Milei took part. So maybe can we quickly go through the numbers so that the audience can have an idea on what Argentina is like, please?
Yeah, and just to give you guys a very quick glance of what kind of situation did Milei receive. Not only he received it, but that's also why he got elected, in my opinion, because our situation, it was a gradual decline from the past 80 years, but it reached a breaking point last year. He received a country with 210% inflation in 2023. It's really hard to imagine for someone who doesn't get to experience it. Even, for example, you were asking me how it affects, like you're a contractor. You need to build something for someone. And then you're building an apartment building. You cannot give a budget. Like you give a budget to someone about the flooring, it's only going to be valid for 3 days. You don't pay the price in 3 days, the price is going to change.
But how is this gonna work?
Yeah.
I mean, only until you give this example to me, I finally realized how extreme this could go to.
It's very extreme. Like how do you set your salary every month, right? To be adjusted.
And you said, how is it going to work? Well, it doesn't work. That's why we were getting poorer and more poor every year, right? It actually doesn't work at all. But people, how do they survive? Well, they try to index the prices to the US dollar, or they try to adjust it every month. Like people were getting salary rises every 2 weeks at the end because inflation was getting worse and worse and worse. There's a phrase in Spanish that we say that in this kind of inflation in Argentina, the prices go up in the 电梯, but the salaries go up the stairs.
电梯.
You know? So always for the worse. And in December, he took office last December. In December, the monthly inflation was 25%, which if you annualize it, that's 1,300% of annual inflation. So we were heading towards a hyperinflation. He received the country in a very, very precarious situation because as he's always explaining that monetary policy has a delay of its effects of from 18 to 24 months. So, for example, the countries that printed a lot of money during the pandemic, only the inflation, for example, in the US dollar, it happened 2 years after that. The same for the Japanese economy, even longer. And Argentina was the same. So in 2023, Argentina government printed a third of its GDP, to finance the spending and the political campaign of the other opponent of Milei. So we had super high inflation, but it was spiraling to a hyperinflation. Second, the government spending was 49% of the GDP. So basically half of the economy was the government spending.
That's unheard of.
It's to a point where it became unsustainable. And so what it meant is that each year the economy, like we hadn't had economic growth since 2011. The economy was being choked by the size of government spending. And then Argentina was in the top 3 of the countries with the highest tax burden in the world. And it's not only income tax. Income tax is actually not that high. It's 35%. So I would say it's average, but yeah, it's a lot of other small taxes that are in the economy that add up to, and also export tax, import tax, gross revenue tax, just an array of taxes that just also labor tax for when you have employees, pension fund, and then. Not only, this is what is more 夸张, I think, is not only our spending is 49% of GDP, the taxes are also record high, but even in that situation, you're still running a huge fiscal deficit of 17% of GDP.
Right.
So that is not enough.
So just to give the audience some kind of idea, the U.S. Government spending to their GDP is around 24%, which is half of what Argentina is doing. And for the Chinese one, it's like 21%. So it's around maybe less than half.
And China and the US already have much more solid economies. So if they could even withstand, they would not suffer the consequence as much as Argentina does of such a high pressure, right? Even with that kind of spending and tax levels, we still had 17% GDP fiscal deficit. And that's why we were getting more and more debt. We were getting more and more inflation. That's why the central bank interest rate of Argentina last year was 133%. So imagine what kind of financing could be for businesses. There was no mortgage market. Young people in Argentina, people can only buy apartments in cash.
With that interest rate, you basically cannot do anything in financing.
So financing as a percentage of GDP in Argentina last year was only 3%. If you look at other countries, you realize it's nothing.
Yeah, because it doesn't work, right? Yeah. Who would take a 133% interest rate?
Yeah, no one.
Sorry, I'm curious. I thought so. If by definition your annualized GDP in the last month is 1,300%, and you can borrow from the central government for 130%, it actually makes sense to just borrow the money and spend it, right?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, and that's what I was going to mention. That 133% interest rate is already negative interest rate
because of the inflation.
Not real. Yeah, because inflation is so high. Actually, if you could finance yourself at that tax, as long as you have an income that is being increased by the rate of inflation, then it still makes sense. But who's going to actually lend at that rate, right? Only the government was lending, and it was losing money lending it because it's a negative interest rate. So that's why actually private banks were not offering any mortgage, because the actual interest rate should be higher or should be in US dollars, but the people's income is in pesos, which is constantly being devaluated. So there's no mortgage market. And then the only Taekwan would be public banks who are giving below inflation interest rates.
Right.
So they're capitalizing. So basically they're giving money for free in a way of loan, right?
I just have more questions as you mentioned. So what exactly does the bank in Argentina do if they don't lend money to anyone else? Yeah. What would be their business?
Well, it's not that they don't lend money to anyone. They don't lend money to anyone except the Argentinian government. So in the past, let's say 10 years, yes. So it's in a way, what you see with the US Treasury bonds is what happened in Argentina to a bigger extent, right? The banks would only buy the Argentina Central Bank let's say the LACE, the treasury bonds, and that was it. So they were kind of nationalized in a way, and they didn't really have to compete against each other. They would just, because the government is running so many deficits, that they always want to put more debt in the market. And so the banks are, and then the government is, printing more money to pay those loans. And then it's just a snowballing effect. So that's why our central bank is really broke.
Then where do the savings come from? This also creates another question on like how the snowball effect just starts. And how could they ever make money if they cannot beat inflation? It is not, or maybe they are nationalized. I don't know. There has to be some rationalized answer to it, right?
So the question is, how can a central bank have negative reserves, right? So this happens when a central bank is not only doesn't have, like it's debt. Because in Argentina, we had two kinds of debt. One is the treasury debt, which was also very big. The other one was the central bank debt. And so the treasury will be financed its deficit through the central bank. And the central bank is going to issue this sort of bonds where they'll give it to the treasury, and then the treasury will give it to the banks. And so that's why, and then in the end, because even this way of financing got exhausted, the central bank was using the private people's reserve banking, fractional reserve banking system as to finance itself. So it was going to bankrupt the whole people actually as well. So that's why people were taking money out of the bank system as well.
Wow, I wonder what would happen to the U.S. Treasury one day. I mean, this feels like something that is doing exactly the same
going
way.
in the same direction. And that's why when I look at the U.S. economy, I look at Argentina as a cautionary tale, because in the U.S., in the past months, the interest payment on the debt has surpassed, it's become the biggest spending of the budget, right? That's even more than defense, more than welfare. And this is the same. That's what happened to Argentina on a much bigger extent, and without being the currency reserve of the world. So
I was talking to a lot of like institutions, investors, international ones. I think people are pretty clear that the Fed, that the U.S. government cannot pay for their treasury one day, or at least at this kind of interest rate is not making any sense. So I think for sure people believe that the Fed is going to decrease their interest rate, but the only way to keep U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is through war. So most institution investors in the next 5 years, they are expecting more localized wars like around the world because of that. And this is the only way that the U.S. dollar can can maintain their reserve currency status.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because they should be able to repay it if they reduce the spending. Like the U.S. government spending also has been growing off the charts, but they haven't had a huge enough crisis to make them realize, I think, that they should do it.
Yeah, actually, I think the U.S. government also wants to control the deficit level, but it's very hard. And we also can see the same thing happen to Japan, actually, in late 1990s, right? And the only way they deal with this problem is to let some kind of state-owned companies to be bankrupted. And it's also very, very brutal. I think this is a necessity, the necessary way to solve the problem. But for U.S. dollar, it's very hard because they control the whole world economy. So I think Jason's the speculation is very likely to happen. So I totally agree.
It's not only, I think now it's gone to the point where it's the ball, the decision is not entirely theirs, even with war. If there were another country that had a sound fiscal policy that was credible and it was big enough, I think it could overtake. The issue is that a lot of other central banks have abused printing currency even more or equally as the US. So no one can step up and be like, all right. Yeah. Yep. So going back to Argentina,
maybe we should talk about what he has achieved in 6 months. What Milei has achieved in 6 months.
Just two more small details of what he received was it got to the problem got to the extent that the government in Argentina, the system is if you export and let's say you sell your soybeans or whatever to outside, you don't receive the US dollars in the cash or in your account. The central bank will take it and they will convert to you and give you pesos in your account. And the same when you import something, you pay them with pesos and they will give dollars to the foreign supplier, right? The issue is that they were because we had a deficit, then the government was using all the US dollars that they would receive from export. And then it couldn't give enough to the importers. And so the importers were starting to having debt to all the foreign suppliers. Not because they couldn't pay, it's because the government had used the US dollars and didn't have any.
They only have pesos, right? Yeah. And it's depreciating like hell.
Yeah, exactly. And the foreign suppliers are not going to take pesos. So what happened is that Milei took office and they have 50 billion USD in central bank debt to the private companies in Argentina that were importing. And on top of that, what I mentioned, the central bank had negative reserves of 14 billion US dollars. So, and a spiraling hyperinflation. It's like unheard of to receive a situation like this. But in a way, he himself says that this situation is maybe what it took for the people to realize, okay, we need to change the course and elect him. And then what has he done in 6 months? He's been in power for 6.5 months. Some of the first measures he took, part of Argentina's growing spending was materialized also in more and more ministries, more and more government agencies. We had 23 ministries, and he slashed 15 of those and only kept 14 of them. He kept 9. 13. He kept 9. And he only kept economy, Ministry of Economy, Security, Education, Health, Defense, Foreign Relations, Infrastructure, and Human Capital, and Commerce, 9 of them. So that also has to do with his philosophy that he believes the government should only care about those things, the main things, and do it really well. And so he closed down ministers such as Environmental Ministry, Women Right and Minorities Rights Ministry, and many others. He fired thousands of government employees. He reduced also the benefits, just like he had done with his own salary. He said, we cannot, if everybody gonna do the effort to turn this country around, the politics should be the first one to lead by example. So he reduced the number of drivers for politicians. He reduced the number of free cell phones that they will get, all the free meals, like just all the perks. And he froze the salaries of himself and all his cabinet. And by freezing is actually doing a huge reduction because we still have inflation, right? So far in the year, we have over 70% inflation, even though it's going down really rapidly. But he's lost 70% of his salary, in terms of real purchasing power. And he has reduced the government spending by 30%, which is, it's the magnitude it's just huge. And this has allowed the government to achieve fiscal surplus from month number 1. Before he got elected, other parties and journalists were debating on, in social media and TV channels about the spending reduction. Maybe could do 1% of GDP, 2%. Otherwise, the people are not going to accept it. They're going to complain, etc., etc. Milei reduced close to 10 points of deficit in the first month, slashed spending by 30%.
So before, the government spending was like 49% or half of the GDP. Then he reduced like 1/3 of them.
So now we have to measure again to GDP because GDP has changed. We had a small recession in the last month, but I don't have the latest GDP, percentage of spending, but it reduced 30%. It's he achieved fiscal surplus in 1 month. And not only that, but he sustained the surplus for 6 consecutive months up until now, and that has been like no one. If you ask any Argentinian last year if that would even be possible, no one would have said yes. No one, and maybe probably not even me. For sure, not me. No one thought he would have the political, not only the decision, but also the power to do it and the courage to do it.
Right.
And also that has allowed so he completely eradicated the treasury being financed by printing of currency from day one.
Just a quick question. I'm just personally very curious. We just had this Trump assassination. So why wasn't he assassinated? Or was there any attempt in the past?
There have been in his inauguration parade, someone threw a glass bottle that almost hit him in the head. But
that's okay.
That's not too bad.
It's not it's not a gun.
You know why? Because he was the only one who ran his campaign saying, I'm going to do this.
And deliver.
Like, he literally said, I'm going to do all the big changes from day one so that we can, it's like taking out a Band-Aid from a wound. If you do it slowly, or a surgery, whatever, if you do it over months, you're going to die. You cannot take the pain. You got to do it quickly. And he said it. And he even said, it's going to be tough for all of us. I'm going to also bite the bullet myself. All of us are going to be hard, but we're going to go out of it together as a strong country.
Yeah,
and he said it. And he was elected with this campaign with 55% of Argentinian voting, which he received the most amount of votes for a president in Argentina history. And so later, when he actually says he does what he said he was going to do, not only people support him, but actually his image increased, his positive image increased, and this is something just like you could not believe it, Jason, like Argentinian career politicians could not believe it.
Well, I had to say this is very positive. Just like we discussed, this is something, the government deficit, right, is probably one of the root cause of the situation in Argentina sitting in for like 80 years or something. And he solved it like in the first months of it. And when you look at the numbers, it's even more crazy. What I mentioned is more in 122 years, there were only 12 years that we had surplus. The rest were all deficits. Right.
It's really hard for Argentina to do this. And he's done it for 6 consecutive months, and he's going to keep it. And that's why Argentina's country risk measured by JP Morgan went from 3,000 points when he took office, and now he's down to 1,400. It is less than half.
Right.
And that's why Argentina's sovereign debt, our bonds were trading at $20, at 20 cents on the dollar. That trading level was worse than Ukraine, which is invaded, worse than Afghanistan, it's worse than Yemen. There was a reason. It was a reason. Argentina was broke. Like, the government kept on spending more than it had. And it would rather default on debt than do the diet. Milei changed that completely.
Right.
And that's why the country risk decreased. And that's why the bonds went from 20 cents on the dollar to 60 cents. So they tripled in price in 3 months.
But Thomas, do you think that government surplus is in a longer term sustainable? Is there any sort of objection voice? Because the welfare has been cutting down. I'm sure there's some objections.
Actually, the only thing that he didn't cut down, that he increased, is the welfare. And this is very interesting. Yeah, what Milei said is people who depend on welfare, the poorest people in Argentina, they're not the culprit of our situation. They're the victims of the system.
True.
Because our leadership before destroyed our economy. They got them out of jobs, into poverty, and they had no other choice than to live out of that subsidy, right? So when I take office, he said, I'm going to maintain them there for as long as they need to get back on their feet.
So it's actually not reduced, but maintained or even increased.
It's increased. And so that's also why he's been able to do the reform.
Well, this is only one implications, right? It shows how, I don't want to use that word, it shows how corrupted government has been.
I will be the first one to say it, and for them it was beneficial for many years because these people were depending on the subsidy, so they're going to vote for the one who gave it to them for many, many, many years. So it was a failed democracy in a way because it's not a free voting system. And so he maintained the welfare. That's why he's this surplus that is going to be sustainable. Now that he's done not only the surplus and spending reduction, but he's also passed the biggest reform in Argentina's history in terms of law and decrees. That's going to allow the economy to start growing. And that's also going to contribute to the deficit because he has frozen government spending. And he's also going to start privatizing our deficitary public companies. For example, our Argentina has a national airline. And since it was nationalized more than 10 years ago, it has cost Argentinian people $7.5 billion in deficit, which is a lot for just running an airline. Like there was no benefit to us as Argentina. We could have flown with other private companies as well, right?
So it has been losing money all the years?
It was losing money all the years, yeah. And it became a nest for corruption and all sorts of problems.
Right.
And so Milei wants to privatize this and many other public companies that are costing the Argentinian people a lot of money in deficit.
Right.
And so his reform is going to continue even more. The GDP should start growing. Actually, the data for last month just came in showing that the economy has rebounded very well.
Sorry, can you elaborate a little bit more about how the privatization will actually help your country? Because in some countries, it's a highly debated question. So on one hand, those are state-owned enterprises, but somebody would even argue that it's subsidizing the people, right? For example, they're charging less in terms of, I don't know, airfare or gas or something.
Yeah. So that case is very interesting to debate in Argentina because what you're doing, even in the case that you were subsidizing the airfare, is the people who have not the means to fly who are paying for the people who have the means to fly.
True.
Which is the most regressive kind of subsidy that there can be, right? And then not only that, but in Argentina, because, for example, it's called Argentine Airlines. What happened was that this airline did not want to let other airlines compete in the market. It wanted to have a monopoly. So what it would do is every time another airline wants to fly one route in Argentina, it needs to get this airline's approval. And also, they cannot put an airfare cheaper than Argentine Airlines. So actually, it's precluding the people from getting cheaper airfare.
Right.
It's crazy. It's insane because we're paying for it in two ways at the same time.
And they're still losing money.
They're still losing money. Yeah. There are many companies like that. Like one argument could be if there's a public company that is being run very well and it's a net positive to a certain country's people, then, well, it could be debatable, right? In Argentina, our public companies have been draining resources from the people for no benefit. So that's why Milei wants to privatize them.
But who will be the buyer, especially for kind of critical area like electricity, utility, and also resources, right? We all know that the Chile government recently just publicized their lithium business, right? So how would who will be the buyer in your country? Is it from your wealthy family as well again, or from the
So something this case is extremely interesting because Milei, you know what he said? He said, actually, I'm going to give this company to the workers. If this is really valuable and we want to protect it as a country, then wouldn't it be better that I just give it to all the public workers and give it to them? They can run it as a cooperative, and then the union doesn't want it. And so that was his strategy of saying, okay, if it's really good, then you guys should have it.
Why don't you take it, right?
Yeah. You should take it, and you're going to reform it. You're going to make it at least not deficitary. Otherwise, it's going to be broke. And then the union doesn't want it. We'll see. Right now, they're trying to make it better, to at least not be deficitary. And then they will either give it to the workers or they will privatize. They'll see if someone wants to buy it. They're doing the same with a couple of public companies. For example, one we have is the oil company. It's called YPF. It's traded in New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, yeah, YPF.
Yeah. So this company, some people could argue that it's not run that poor, even though it's also deficitary. The issue is that it's also when you are the regulator, at least this is the case in Argentina. In Argentina, if the company is also the regulator because it's the government, then it's disrupting the whole competition in that sector. We have the largest non-conventional oil and gas reserve in the world in south of Argentina. It's called Vaca Muerta. And it hasn't been exploited to its full extent because of this. So, and also when we nationalized this company, YPF, we did it violating the contracts of the private investors. So we have lost a trial, like a claim in New York, for $16 billion US, which is basically the whole value of the company. This was done by the previous leadership. That has been very costly for people. I think the government doesn't know how it's going to pay for this claim because it's more than the value of the whole company right now. It's been very bad what they've done in terms of nationalizing and running public companies.
So I've got a question I think most audience will want to ask at this point. Given that Milei is so great and Argentina is in the process of recovering, is there a stock index that we can buy? Or what would you recommend us to maybe just think about if we want to allocate into Argentina?
Yeah. The funny thing is that when it was the perfect time to buy it, let's say when he took office, when he was elected, a lot of people didn't think that he was going to be able to do the things that he did. So a lot of people didn't believe it. And then the market rallied like crazy in the past few months. Yeah. So buying the bonds and even buying stocks have been there's even some famous investors in the US like Druckenmiller who
I heard about it.
Yeah, endorsed it. So I think let me just say this. Some sectors are going to grow very well, and they're already growing, which is oil and gas, mining, agriculture, and electricity. And I also believe the financial sector is going to grow. For example, one of the magnitude of this reform has been so big in such a short period of time that we went from a near hyperinflation to, ever since May, banks started offering mortgages again in the market.
Okay.
They hadn't had mortgages for buying homes in many years. And now they're giving it at 7%, 5 to 7% interest rate in US dollar, right? So it's not bad. And it's going to keep going down as our economy normalizes. And so that's just proving how just more stability is going to grow our financial system. It's going to grow all the other sectors as well. So I would say, or at least I can say what I'm doing is I'm invested in those sectors of the Argentine economy when it comes to stocks and also into bonds.
Right. Nice to hear.
but there's a big caveat. You have to be willing to put money and just don't look at it for a while. It's going to be volatile in the market because even now, some people think he's not going to be able to do it long term, right? It's to stabilize. Like Argentina has such a long record of failed policy and hyperinflation and all this that,
I've heard this phrase. Every international investor has been, checked by Argentina at least once in their lifetime.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
No, it's true. It's the reality. You cannot get mad at the truth. But on the other hand, that's why the assets are so cheap. That's why they.
Can you give us an example? Like, what is the price for like a farmland or maybe just a house?
Yeah.
In
the real estate price.
Yeah. So real estate is a very good point. For example, I think farmlands is a very attractive investment right now in Argentina because its productivity is very high. Argentina's Nongye is one of the best in the world. And the natural resource, let's say the soil, is just on par with New Zealand, Australia, US, Ukraine in terms of quality. But so it's producing something that is sold internationally at a same price.
Yeah.
But the price of this land is only trading at 5 to 7 or 8 times less than the US price. That's all because of the country risk. And all because of the tax that the previous government
5 times less, like 20%?
Yeah, 20% or even lower. The value of these assets, in my opinion, is going to increase a lot once people start realizing, okay, this reform in Argentina is gonna last. It's already growing. The price is already increasing. it's already getting harder and harder to find land to buy because of increased demand. For example, the 一公顷, like 1 hectare of very good land in Argentina can be somewhere between 8,000到8,000到1公顷到15000美金1公顷，1公顷等于15亩，yeah 都是美元。So in the US,
very attractive,
yeah, it's very cheap. So you can buy a very, very big land and it's very productive.
Yeah, and the whole country is really opening up more for the foreign investment, right?
Exactly. So one of the first executive orders that Milei passed was opening up the purchasing of real estate and land, especially farmland, which was forbidden for foreigners to buy up until Milei. He just opened up. So now anyone from any country can go and buy land with no restriction.
Wow.
So that's
we should go to Argentina.
You guys are welcome. And,
that's actually what I was planning to say. I mean, we should actually go plan a trip to Argentina.
Yeah.
I'll be very happy to be the host.
Wow.
My family is in that industry as well, so we can do a very cool trip to see how the agriculture sector works. It's very and it's even more than like, let's just say if you invest in real estate in Buenos Aires, right? The properties there are also very undervalued. Buenos Aires is one of the most beautiful cities in Latin America. Everybody that goes really likes it. But let's say a 2-bedroom apartment in one of the very cool neighborhood, let's say 100 square meter, was selling for $500,000 US, maybe less.
It's like kind of like maybe it's more expensive than Hangzhou, I guess. So
but I'm talking about really good real estate in a prime area. I don't know. Is it still?
If you translate, 就是3万多美平啊。
3万多人民币
，3万多人民币每平。
还可以，其实不贵。
Yeah, Buenos Aires is a beautiful city.
So this is like prime. This is prime.
Prime in the capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It's like 350万人民币. And modern apartment with a pool and all this stuff. So I think that's also going to increase. But I believe farmland is more attractive because it's tied to an industry and it's more productive. And the government is reducing the tax on this industry by a lot. And also, it's farmland in Argentina is very low in labor cost. Whereas if you want to invest the same amount of capital into apartments, then you need to have management on it. You need to repaint the apartments. You have problems with tenants. All this mafan that you don't have in another kind of business.
Maybe can you talk a little bit about what is the election process in Argentina and how long could Milei be still in place? And one very important and interesting question: do you think he will change the constitution and become a real dictator? I mean, up until now, for everything that he did, he is worth to become the king of Argentina in my mind. So I'm just curious on how you would think about that.
Very good questions, both. So our political system is very similar to the US in terms of how it works. So we have presidential elections every 4 years, and then we have midterms elections for half of the House of Representatives and a third of Senate every 2 years. So next year, we're going to have election for Congress. 3 years from now, 3.5 years from now, he will go for a re-election. And after 2 terms, you need to step down. That's how it works in Argentina. And so for his term, he has 3.5 years of more time to go. However, next year's midterm election is really important because Milei arrived in power with a new party, and after getting into politics in only 2 years, his power in Congress is very, very small. He only has he only has around 10 to 15% of Congress, so he's not able to pass laws by himself. And so that's why it's very impressive that he's been able to pass such a comprehensive reform without having a majority. But next year when he goes to election, and this is also why he did all the reform very quickly, because he wants the people to be able to feel the benefits of reform before next year when it's midterm. because he's able to get a very good election next year. Even if he's only does the same performance he had last year, people are expecting him to do way better. But let's just say he just does the same, then he's going to at least double his presence in Congress. And that will allow him to even go deeper into reform. His goal, like up until now, only 7 months in, the reform that he's done has made Argentina climb 50 spots in the Economic Freedom Index,
right,
positioning Argentina close to Spain and Germany. His goal, and he's said this many times, is by the time he's done, he hopes to put Argentina number one, next to Singapore and Hong Kong. That's his stated goal.
Right.
And if he gets reelected, then he'll be there for 8 years. In terms of the Constitution, there could be an argument for him to reform the Constitution to make it more libertarian in his views. For example, if he wants to prevent Argentina to have a central bank, then he might need to do a constitutional change, because he is worried not only for himself, but he's mostly worried he wants to prevent Argentina from falling back into the errors of the past. That he has never said he wants to do it, but I think it could be an option. But I don't think he wants to perpetuate in power. He's always said that he's not drawn to power itself. He said that if he gets reelected for a second term, he will do it. But after that, he will retire from politics altogether. And he will go back to studying economics, giving conferences to make money, and to study the Torah, which is, the Jewish scriptures, which is something that he's been doing for some time. Even though he's not Jewish, he studies the philosophy of it.
So he's not doing that to please like any Jewish power like in the world. It's something that he has done before, like in election.
And he's always talking about different parable, like metaphors from the Old Testament. And actually, in today's world, the stances that he takes pro-Israel and against Hamas are actually very risky in a way. It's not the mainstream position of the world. So it takes a lot of political will for him. He could have just said nothing about it.
Yeah,
I think he actually believes in it.
Yeah.
And he every Friday he will meet with a rabbi to discuss philosophy and how to deal with power and the ego and all this stuff.
So Milei is obviously very popular right now within Argentina. Do you see any milestone he has to achieve or any threat or roadblocks down the road so that he will lose some kind of popularity before the voting? Yeah.
There are many roadblocks that he needs to face every day. For example, something else he did was when he was slashing spending, ever before, the government was giving money to all the media in Argentina. And that meant that even though we had public media, but also private media, but because the private media is also receiving their money, then our politicians basically were controlling the media as well. So Milei said, okay, I'm going to close down the state media, but not only that, I'm going to also stop sending money to the private media. So the private media do not really like him. So they're constantly criticizing, they're constantly trying to make him look bad, etc.
Wow.
So that's a big roadblock, and that's why he uses Twitter so much.
Right.
Because that's his way to, on YouTube and Instagram,
Yeah.
it's his way to talk direct to the people.
Yeah, you gotta have your channel of voice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's one major roadblock. The other one is, and he says it very clearly, Milei says, the people have given me two mandates. Number one, eradicate inflation. Number two, solve insecurity in the streets. And Argentina is not as unsafe as some other Latin American countries, but we have some security problems.
Like Brazil?
It's not. Brazil, I would say, is a little bit more dangerous. But yeah, it's not too far from it. And so, so he said, we are going to work very hard at solving these two problems. And Milei's Minister of Security, which interestingly enough it was one of his opponents in the presidential election. So he took her into his government to be the Minister of Security. And
wow.
Yeah, they've been doing it's been doing a good job, I believe, in reducing the crime, in reducing crime. But still a lot of work to do.
Right. So he will not like cut back the spending on the police force, or
no. He's actually increasing on the police, and he's building more prison. He's also re-equipping our military. Our military was destroyed for many years in Argentina. He's doing, without spending a lot of money, he's modernizing our military. For example, we just bought F-16 planes from Denmark at a very, very good deal, basically 100% financed. Yeah, so he's also doing that.
Yeah.
He's trying to control our ocean, which has had a lot of illegal fishing. So just control our airspace and maritime space a bit.
This is very interesting. Because before, I think Milei was just all ideology, but it looks like he's a very practical guy as well. That's
a very, very good point, because people would criticize him for being anarcho-capitalist or being too extreme libertarian.
Yeah.
And he's doing some things that are very pragmatic. And for example, the military, some very extreme anarcho-capitalists maybe believe you don't need a military, but he's strengthening the military. So reality is more complex than it seems.
Very last topic, dollarization.
Dollarization.
Is it necessary? Yeah.
So everybody, when talk about Milei's monetary policy, always mention dollarization.
Right.
And I think this has been misguided by the media.
Right.
Because if you listen to what he says, he wants to institute a currency competition system. What he says is, I want to close Argentinian central bank because it has been used over 100 years by our governments to take advantage of Argentina people.
Right.
By printing currency with no backing. I just want to close it down so that no one ever again can do that to the people. But I don't want to tell people what currency to use. They can use any currency they want, because he says he believes in economic freedom. So in that regard, if people want to use the dollar, fine. If they want to use the RMB, no problem.
Right.
If they want to use Bitcoin, that's fine. It's up to them. And one time, for a couple of years, maybe the US dollar, then the US dollar has high inflation. They can go to the Swiss franc, and different people can choose different things. And he even says maybe companies in the oil and gas sector, they want to transact their deals in the WTI oil. No problem. They can use that as currency. In agri sector, they want to trade in oil, in soybeans. We're going to allow it.
It's not really about a currency. It's really about tying up the hands of the government.
Exactly. And he said, and this is where the 舞会 comes. He said, from Argentina's history point of view, it's most likely that Argentinian people are going to choose the US dollar as their default currency, at least in the short to midterm, because that's what they've been doing to protect from inflation for 100 years. But there's going to be freedom for people to choose whatever. They want to use the Japanese yen, go ahead. He thinks that's the only, because this is another debate inside of Argentina in politics. Some of the party that is not the most, let's say it's not Kirchner party, is the other one, who is sort of an ally to Milei. They tend to believe that Argentina should still have its own central bank, but it should do it well. You should do it in a way that it doesn't have inflation. And Milei says, we've proven that it's impossible. We cannot handle it. And second of all, even if we can handle it, there's a chance a new government will come in maybe 5, 10, 20 years, whatever, that's going to go back to it and going to destroy it again. So it's better to just get rid of it.
Yeah. Thomas, I got two questions. Actually, the first one is if the government advocate US dollar exchange, then how do they guarantee that they can have enough US dollar reserve to exchange?
So what Milei's government is trying to do for the past 6 months, they've been buying up US dollar reserves for the central bank, enough so that it can rescue the whole monetary base of pesos. That way, it can guarantee if there's a bank run to the dollar, they can be like, no problem. You guys want to fully dollarize? Just give me your pesos. I will give you crispy US dollar bills, and then that's it. If you want to keep the peso, no problem. Up to you. So that's why they're accumulating more and more reserves every month.
Okay. And number two is that based on trade front dilemma, so we can see that if we a lot of countries encounter this kind of situation that they just lose control of their economy, very autonomous, with their own demand. But if Argentina also doing the same thing, then they will give up a lot of autonomy on this part.
Yeah, so this is why he's now proposing a dollarization. Like, for example, in Latin America, we have a couple of interesting examples. Panama is dollarized. Ecuador is also dollarized. And El Salvador is also dollarized. And those are basically the only three countries that haven't had monetary problems in the past 20 years. Chile also not.
Sorry, El Salvador is in Bitcoin right now, not dollarized. Let me correct you a bit.
Wait, no, but they allow Bitcoin, but
their reserve currency is by far.
You mean
Bitcoin.
the central bank?
They are buying one Bitcoin every cent. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a good point. But the people in Salvador use the US dollar. Yeah, they use the US dollar to pay stuff. They got rid of the local currency many years ago. That would be the typical dollarization, which has the issue that you just mentioned. And it also has another issue, I think in English, maybe I don't know if the right term in English, but it's called seigniorage, which means the one who prints the currency gets to use it first before it gets inflated. Like the inflation comes after he already used it. Some countries that when they dollarize, they have two options. They either do it in a partnership with the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve is going to compensate them against this effect by giving them more currency or giving them before they give it to someone else, or they do it unofficially, which then they will suffer this. But Milei's system is competition of currency. So unless everybody in 45 million Argentinians, all of them decide to only use US dollars, then we would have this issue. But it's not even a permanent issue, because if the trifling effect becomes very notorious, they can quickly switch to another currency. But it's not going to be like companies that do trade with China, they're going to use the RMB, or people who think the RMB is very stable, they're going to use it too, or the Swiss franc. I think there's going to be a lot of variety.
Very interesting. It has been like a long 2-hour conversation. Mm-hmm. And Thomas, we were texting each other that we have learned so much from you.
It's such a revelation. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm very happy to hear. I hope.
Yeah. Everything is fresh for us.
Yeah.
And this is so interesting. And we should definitely plan our trip to Argentina by the end of this year.
That would be epic, and I'll be happy to organize it. We can invite some more friends who are interested in business and economics, and maybe I can organize some meetings with some people over there to make it even more cool.
I'm telling you the truth. After a conversation with you, Thomas, I can say I'm becoming a fan of Milei already.
I try to be objective. I think at least
it's all the facts, right?
At least he's trying to see what's the root cause of the problem and just go to that, instead of just putting a patch and a patch and a patch. That's what we've done for 100 years. It will be interesting to keep an eye on what's going on.
For sure. We should definitely invite you back like a quarter later so that we can give our audience another Argentina update in Q3.
Yes. That'll be
epic.
Yeah,
that'll be epic.
Because back home, we're keeping track on the inflation and everything every month, even every week. It's crazy. Right.
So we are officially naming this program the Wondrous Argentina Quarterly Update. This is our special program from now on.
It's my honor.
And we are
honor's all ours.
We are very lucky to have you. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So great.
I'm very happy to meet Vincent and Ran as well for the first time. And I also learned a lot from you guys. You guys know so much about the world economic and business. It's just really inspiring. And I guess we'll talk again in the next quarter.